From Philharmonic Hall in Lincoln Center, home of the world's greatest musical events, the Bell Telephone System brings you another program in the award-winning series, the New York Philharmonic Young People's Concerts, under the musical direction of Leonard Bernstein. And here is Mr. Bernstein.
A lot of breath from that one. You probably all know what that exciting little piece was. It's called the Russian Sailor's Dance from the ballet The Red Poppy by Glière. But even if you didn't know it by name, I'll bet you recognized it as Russian music. And that's because it's so full of Russian folk spirit, folk melody, folk rhythm. In other words, it's what is known as nationalistic music, music that reflects the character of a particular nation, whether that nation be Russia or France or Peru or the Navajo Indian tribe. Now, for instance, if we play this bit of music, you'll immediately know it's what? Try to guess. Twenty guesses. Wrong. Right. Did I? Hungarian. Correct. It's Liszt's second Hungarian Rhapsody. Now try this one. Maybe this will be easier for you. What's that? Right. Oh, well, that's easy. Obviously, everybody knew that one. Spanish. All right, that's from a ballet by De Falla. Well, anyway, that's the way music used to be written. Neatly packaged with clear nationalistic labels and tied with colorful native ribbons. But I say used to be. These days, it's a whole other story, especially since the last World War. The most recent music has been getting more and more international. In other words, it's becoming harder all the time to spot what country a really modern piece comes from. For instance, see if you can tell the national origin of this. Any suggestions? No one brave enough to try?
German.
Somebody said it over here, I think. German. All right, it's German, although I don't know how you could tell. But amazingly enough, that was a complete piece by the famous and very influential Austrian composer Anton von Webern, written in the year 1913. Now, did you hear anything particularly German about that music? No, probably not. All right, here's another bit of music in the same style, and see if you have any better luck with it. Does that begin to sound any more German to you? Huh? Doesn't sound any more German than the first one, I take it. If it does, there's something wrong, because what we just played isn't German at all, but a piece by a modern Japanese composer named Mayuzumi. Now, how about that? If I hadn't told you that the second piece of music was by a Japanese, you'd never have known, would you? You see, we've jumped 6,000 miles from Germany to Japan, and the music has hardly changed at all. So something strange is going on these days, isn't it? Perhaps music is finally becoming what so many people have always liked to call it, a universal language. Now, just for fun, listen to this bit of music written in 1948, and see if you can tell what country this is from. How about that? Same problem again. Could be by a German, or by a Japanese, or I heard somebody say Mars here before. But it happens not to be from Mars. It happens to be by an American. named Milton Babbitt, a very gifted composer. Now, here are a few bars by an Italian composer. This is just to complete our little world trip. A young Italian composer named Nonno. Again, that doesn't sound any more Italian than the Japanese piece did. Do you think so? No. Now, I don't want you to get the idea that all new music sounds like this or that it all sounds exactly alike. It's just that the general trend these days is in the direction of an international style. I'm not saying that this is either good or bad. It's just a fact of history. With the world becoming smaller all the time, with news and fashions jumping over oceans in a matter of minutes or seconds even, with any spot on the globe just a few hours away by air from any other spot, it's no wonder that the world's music is becoming more and more alike. But there are lots of people who think that this is a pity, and who long for the good old days when German music sounded German and Japanese music sounded Japanese, and you could always spot American music by its jazziness. Well, gone are the days. Now, I don't want you to fall into the other trap of thinking that all old music was nationalistic, any more than I want you to think that all new music isn't. Up to the 19th century, most music was more or less international in flavor, in sound. For instance, this is a bit of music by Bach, who, as you know, was a German. Now, here's a bit of music by Vivaldi, who, as you know, was an Italian. Practically the same piece. Even a musical expert would find it difficult to tell which of those two was German and which Italian. They sound so much alike. But once we come to the 19th century, there we have another story. Because those 100 years, from 1800 to 1900, were the time of the most tremendous nationalistic politics and spirit in Europe. And also, most of the music that we still hear today in our concert halls was written somewhere in that 100-year period. So if you put those two facts together, you get a third fact, which is that most of the music we still hear today in our concert halls comes out of one fiery nationalistic feeling or another from the 19th century. Now, just think of some of the best-known 19th century pieces that we still hear in our concert halls today, like the prelude to Wagner's opera Die Meistersinger. Now, that has Germany written all over it. It's ponderous, earnest, well-nourished German. And now the same thing is true of almost all the other countries of Europe during that 19th century. This nationalistic feeling was everywhere. For instance, out of Poland came Chopin, who wrote polonaises and mazurkas by the dozen, like this. What else could that be but Polish music? And then out of Italy, there came a whole slew of grand operas, marvelous operas, which are still today the mainstay of our opera houses. There's Rigoletto, Tosca, Pagliacci, Traviata, and all those famous tunes that you know, I'm sure, like this. That's Italian music. I mean, how much more Italian can you get? And then, of course, there was Russia, which was bursting with nationalistic composers all through the 19th century. It was Glinka, Borodin, Mussorgsky, Tchaikovsky, with pieces that went like this. Russian music, you can't mistake it. It's written all over it. And so in the same way, there was Granados and Albéniz in Spain, both being very Spanish indeed, and in Czechoslovakia, or as it was known then, Bohemia, there appeared Dvorak and Smetana, both fierce nationalists, and out of Norway came Grieg, and out of Finland came Sibelius, and out of Hungary came Liszt, and so on and on. Even in our own America, which was born late and took a long time to get going musically, we had our own 19th century nationalists, MacDowell with his Indian suites, and Henry Gilbert with his Negro and Creole dances. And by the way, let's not forget Ernest Schelling, the original founder and conductor of these young people's concerts, who died 25 years ago this month, and whom we are honoring for the great work he did with his concerts for young people, as well as for the proudly American nationalism of the music he wrote. But the greatest American nationalist of the time was certainly that strange and salty New Englander whose name was Charles Ives, and whose wildly original music has only recently begun to be known and appreciated. Ives was a part-time composer. You know, he sold insurance for a living and composed on nights and weekends. But somehow, in his half-amateur, inspired way, he was able to produce music that was not only full of nationalistic American flavor, but music that also predicted many of the new startling sounds that were later to become everyday stuff in what we now call modern music. Ives was a pioneer and a prophet and a patriot, a real old-fashioned American individualist like Emerson and Thoreau. Now, we are going to hear next one of his wildest and most original compositions, a very American piece indeed, called The 4th of July. In this amazing work, we'll be able to get a full picture of Charles Ives, including his fantastic invention of new sounds, bold harmonies, and mad orchestrations, and also his fascinating way with popular American tunes. In the space of this one short piece, we can hear snatches of more than half a dozen such ditties, ranging from the bugle call Reveille to Yankee Doodle, and all mixed up together in a sort of dreamlike, far-out harmony. For it is a dream, this 4th of July, a boy's dream of that most exciting of all boys' holidays, in which skyrockets are mixed up with marching bands and hymn tunes, staying up late, and eating too much picnic food. And so all the familiar tunes come out slightly twisted, a little bit wrong, as they might be in a dream of long ago, especially with indigestion. For instance, at one wild climactic moment, you could hear the flutes playing their version of Glory, Glory, Hallelujah. It sounds like this. And so, at the same time, the cornets are, at the same moment, mind you, are blaring out the first part of the tune. Mine eyes have seen the glory of, that sounds like this. And at the same time, the trumpets and the trombones are trying to top the others with their version of Columbia, the Gem of the Ocean. Yes. And now that's not just dreamlike, you understand. That's probably the way the local band actually sounded when, quite seriously, when Ives was a small boy in the small town of Reading, Connecticut, they had a local band, which I'm sure sounded like that. And Ives was always trying to recall his own childhood in his music. In this case, he did it very graphically, as you hear. But it's part of that boyhood dream, and it's associated with the 4th of July. But even that's not all. At the same time, other instruments are trying to get through with Yankee Doodle. Now, somehow, all those mad tunes go together, tossed around in a feverish memory of drums, fireworks, and church bells. It sounds like this. some dream. Sounds more like a nightmare. And to make it all even more peculiar, Ives has recorded for us that special sound of two bands playing at once. I'm sure you've all had the experience during a parade of hearing one band approaching as another disappears, and each one is in a different rhythm. Well, Ives actually makes this happen in the music by splitting up the orchestra every once in a while into two orchestras, and for those moments, we need two conductors, of course, to keep track of what's going on. So don't be surprised if now and again you find our guest conductor, Seymour Lipkin, suddenly standing up and conducting away in a whole other beat. Mr. Lipkin. This 4th of July by Charles Ives begins in the spooky shadows of the night just before dawn. And you'll hear little bird calls piping in the night and even a rooster crowing for day. And then with the coming of day, the piece gradually builds up by piling one sound on top of another, a march, a hymn, church bells, fireworks, fifes, drums, bugles, until the whole orchestra arrives at one final dissonant shriek, which is supposed to be the skyrocket going off above the town hall. It looks as though the town hall is exploding. And then it all suddenly peters out in a few wispy notes, like waking up from a dream. In fact, you may not even realize the piece is over. The ending is so strange and sudden. So if you hesitate about applauding, Mr. Lipkin and I will understand. Now, that extraordinary piece by Charles Ives that we've just played was part of a 19th century movement in our country to compose American-sounding music, somehow or other, make it sound American. And this movement reached its peak in our own century with Gershwin, who, as you know, used jazz as the main nationalistic element in his music instead of patriotic tunes, and with Aaron Copland, who used cowboy tunes and folk songs as his basic nationalistic element. But by the 1940s, the movement was over, not only in America, but all over the world. In Germany, for example, the last of the great nationalists was Hindemith, who you may remember we talked about last season, apropos of his death. As you know, he is now dead, as is Mahler, who was the last great nationalist in Bohemia. In Spain, the last great one was de Falla, and he's dead. And in Hungary, it was Bartók, and he is dead. Now, even those great nationalistic composers who are still living are not being very nationalistic anymore, like the Russian Stravinsky or the American Copland, who write in a rather international style these days. So you see, times have changed. We're living now in an international world. And there are people who are convinced that a new period of nationalism is coming, especially in the music of the newer nations like Israel and possibly the newly emerging countries of Africa and Asia. It's possible, but at the moment we're still waiting. And these days, audiences who love to hear the music of a nationalistic kind still have to cast a fond look backwards to the last century in order to satisfy their nostalgia. So we're dependent on 19th century music. And so we're going to spend the rest of this hour playing two choice favorites from the good old days of nationalistic music. Our first stop on this sentimental journey is Spain and the music of Manuel de Falla. We're going to hear a suite from his very famous ballet, The Three-Cornered Hat, a light, humorous work full of Spanish fandangos and flamenco spirit. This music is unmistakably Spanish. The moment you hear a rhythm like this, you know you're in Spain. That's absolutely Spanish and could be nothing else. Or a flamenco phrase like this, which you'll hear in this music. Or a dance tune like this one. There's no mistaking what that music is, I'm sure you'll agree. And those are the Spanish materials out of which de Falla weaves his colorful nationalistic tapestry. Now, here are the dances from part one of de Falla's great ballet, The Three-Cornered Hat. We're going to end our program on nationalism by playing for you in its entirety, perhaps the most famous of all nationalistic tone poems, the Moldau by the famous Bohemian composer Smetana. Into this endearing and enduring piece, Smetana has poured all the tenderness and pride of his love of country and has produced this monument of patriotism which celebrates his native land by describing an imaginary journey down its most majestic river, the Moldau. You see, there are various ways in which a composer can pay homage to his country. Ives did it by a musical celebration of the 4th of July, a great national holiday. And the Falla did it by fashioning a large, beautiful ballet out of the folk songs and dances of his native country. And now Smetana does it by celebrating the natural beauties of his country. You've probably heard enough about this piece elsewhere to be able to follow it without my giving you a road map. You've heard about the lapping waves of the Moldau, the stormy rapids, the hunting scene, the wedding scene, the moonlight scene, and so on. And I'm sure you'll recognize them all as you drift happily down Smetana's river. And as you drift, you should feel a warm, romantic glow from the nationalism that used to be.
From Philharmonic Hall in Lincoln Center, the season's second New York Philharmonic Young People's Concert with Leonard Bernstein has presented a program titled Farewell to Nationalism, featuring the Russian Sailor's Dance by Glier, the first suite of Manuel de Falla's Three-Cornered Hat, 4th of July by Charles Ives, and a performance of the Moldau by Smetana. This program was recorded in Philharmonic Hall and was produced and directed by Roger Englander. The New York Philharmonic Young People's Concerts are presented by the Bell Telephone System. The next program in this series will be seen in 9 weeks on Thursday, January 28th, when Mr. Bernstein will present Young Performers. Next week, see the Bell Telephone Hour on another network. Check your local listings for time and station.